Hi, and welcome to Parkinson Place, and thank you for being with us today. And we thank Dr. Angelo Domingo to being with here today to do our spring into action, and along with decluttering our homes and other things we want to declutter, let's declutter our brains, because we know that needs some decluttering. So thank you for being here with us.
Oh, you're so welcome, Susan. Thank you for having me. Folks, today we're going to be talking about decluttering our brains. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of this talk, I do want to discuss a little bit about why this is so important, in particular for people with Parkinson's. Since I know I'm giving this talk for Parkinson Place, I thought I would speak a little bit about why this issue is so central for people with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease affects the connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of our brain. And because of that, people with Parkinson's often report that they have problems paying attention, focusing, shutting out distraction. They have a very difficult time multitasking. These are all very common issues for people struggling with Parkinson's disease. In addition, because Parkinson's disease affects the neurotransmitters or the chemicals in our brain, people with Parkinson's are more prone to anxiety conditions and depression, which also serve as brain clutter. And I'll explain why later on. I just wanted to take this moment to share why this is such a central issue, or should be a central issue for people with Parkinson's, and how in their lives they can manage these symptoms and concentration, attention, processing speed, focus, and also the mood symptoms. Let's start on decluttering your brain. How to achieve a state of peace, focus, and flow. So it's my hope that by the end of this presentation, you will learn what brain clutter represents, how internal and external distractions clutter our thinking, how to define peace, focus, and flow, how to create a sense of peace within ourselves, how to promote mental focus in all that we do, how to reach a state of mental flow when working at something, and what the physiological and emotional impact of decluttering can be. So let's get right into this. So what is brain clutter? Brain clutter actually refers to both internal and external distractions. So internal distractions include doubts, anxieties, worries, intrusive thoughts. They can even include physical discomfort or pain. So I sometimes find that if I'm reading something, either a journal article or a magazine article or a newspaper or even a novel, and I get to the bottom of the page and I have no recollection of what I just read 3 seconds ago, it's because I had other things on my mind. I was either thinking about the laundry or thinking about, my next day's work schedule or an upcoming event. So while I'm reading, it seems as if my brain is processing what's going on, but really it's not, because I have all of these internal distractions happening, anxieties, doubts, worries, or expectations even, but thoughts that are intruding on what I should be thinking about at that moment, which is whatever the task is at hand. There are also external distractions, and those are usually easier to manage. Noise, mess, and overstimulating environment, If you have small children, maybe not so easy to manage. But if you don't, then by eliminating things like noise and physical clutter in our space, or external stimulation like bright lighting can sometimes trigger people, that can really help us to manage those external distractions and eliminate them altogether. Following me so far, Susan? All right.
Yes, all good, Doc.
So what are peace, focus, and flow? So I imagine for most of you, you've heard of the first two, peace and focus, but flow is actually a concept that comes out of sports psychology. So I was really excited because I rarely get to, discuss sports psychology. It's not my area of expertise, but I was really excited to get to incorporate this into the talk today. So peace is a state of freedom from disturbance. It's a state of tranquility. And that's right out of Webster's, folks. So peace is a state of peace includes what we call peace of mind, a mental state of calmness or tranquility, freedom from frustration, anger, fear, guilt, shame, and worry. Focus is a state of directed attention. And we can shape our environments and our minds to promote focus or promote distraction. And we're going to talk a little later about exactly how to do that, how to create peace within ourselves, and how to promote focus. And flow is a state of heightened productivity and creativity that occurs by becoming fully immersed in a single task. It's almost sort of becoming hyper-focused on something and being able to drown out everything else. And we can promote flow by quieting internal and external distractions. We know we've reached a state of flow when we're able to forget about the outside world, quiet our internal world, and feel in total control of what we're doing. We reach total immersion in the task at hand. And you can see flow at work in people like Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, right? These are individuals that when they're on the field or on the court, they can drown out everything else and become hyper-focused on exactly what they're doing. And we're going to discuss how, in more detail, how we can create this state of flow within ourselves. So I want to first talk about peace. How do we bring a sense of peace to our lives, to our both our inner lives and our external life? So first off, meditation. Meditation is a great way to learn about ourselves, our pattern of thoughts and worries. It helps us to distinguish between things we can control and those things that we can't control. And I would encourage everybody to get a really great book. You're all going to probably chuckle, but it's Meditation for Dummies. Meditation for Dummies is actually a terrific overview of the different forms of meditation, of the origins of meditation, the benefits of meditation, and it's all written in plain English. So I encourage anyone who's interested in getting started on meditation to get that book. One of the great things about meditation is it allows us to see our patterns of thinking, where our mind wanders to without judgment. Often when people are bogged down in anxieties or worries or expectations, they go down that rabbit hole and they start processing those worries and expectations and anxieties. Instead of just observing the process, observing the fact that their mind goes automatically to those things. By meditating, we can observe where our mind goes, where it wanders off to without judgment and without getting bogged down in the content of those worries or expectations. We can just see where our mind goes and then practice bringing it back to center. That's where creating peace comes from, is bringing our mind back to center, the task at hand, without judgment and without any kind of self-critical thinking. We're not judging ourselves for being distractible. We're all distractible. We all have worries. We all have anxieties. We're just observing those worries and anxieties and retraining our brain to come back to center. Journaling is a way to lay out all of our doubts and anxieties in a journal or diary to get them out of our head. Often people will ruminate about things. They'll have chronic anxiety or chronic worry about certain topics because they're going over them again and again and again in their head, trying to solve an unsolvable situation. And one of the major problems with chronic worry and anxiety is we never get a chance to distance ourselves from that. Meditation can help, right, by observing that process as a disinterested third party. But so can journaling, because journaling allows us to put it down on paper, temporarily get it out of our head, and then revisit those issues at a later date when we might have more objectivity. The next way to create inner peace is to get adequate sleep. Now, there are a very lucky few people in this world that can run on 5 hours of sleep. I am not one of them. I don't know if you're one of them, Susan. No. I need at least 7. Most people need either 7 or 9 hours of sleep. Like I said, there are some people that need 5. There are some people that need as much as 11. Adequate sleep is central to promoting a sense of peace and also focus and flow, frankly. Adequate sleep realigns our neurotransmitters, that chemical soup in our brain. And it allows our brain to recharge. Sleep is the time when our brain consolidates everything that we've learned and everything that we've done in that day and prepares us for the next day. So adequate sleep is central. Recreation is important. We can't work all the time. What's that saying? All work and no play make Jack a dull boy, right? Having downtime, taking breaks, socializing, doing fun things also recharges our brain. It lessens the load on our brain, and in particular, our frontal lobe. Healthy diet is critical. Healthy diet will lower inflammation across every body system, promotes good mental health. Diet does have a major impact on both mental clarity and physical function. I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about diet. Not only does a healthy diet high in fruits and vegetables and whole grains change the chemical soup in our brain, but it also keeps the blood flow to our brain as healthy as possible. You know, our brain is never to come in direct contact with blood. So the way that nature has solved this problem is our brain is, we call it profused, which means surrounded by and infiltrated by all of these capillary beds. Lots and lots of capillaries whose membranes are so fine. I mean, think about a capillary that you find in the tip of your finger. If you've ever pricked the tip of your finger, you got to really squeeze to get some blood out. These capillaries, the membranes are so fine that blood can pass oxygen and glucose, because our brains run on sugar. Blood can pass oxygen and glucose directly to the brain cells through the membrane and take up waste products from our brains without ever coming in direct contact with actual brain tissue. However, if you have a diet high in processed foods, fats, cholesterol, sodium, these capillaries can start to get clogged up because they're very tiny. They can burst. And what happens when that occurs is whatever area of brain matter is right around that capillary dies. And those are called TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. They're like very, very tiny strokes. And people don't notice that they're happening until we get a lot of them. When a lot of them occur, people can develop what's called cerebrovascular disease or vascular dementia. And so diet, exercise, and sleep have a direct impact on that process. They keep our brains healthy. They keep the blood flow to our brains moving freely, which is what we want. Lastly, there's therapy and medication. You know, mental health treatment can help us resolve a lot of negative and toxic life patterns. It can help us identify and change those toxic patterns. And it also readjusts our neurotransmitters. There's lots of research out there demonstrating that therapy, the process of building a therapeutic relationship with a professional, alters neurotransmitter function. It changes that chemical soup, and so does medication, obviously. Often we talk about using therapy and medication in conjunction because medication really does make it easier to do the work that one needs to do in therapy. Not everybody needs medication, but if you are struggling and already in therapy and maybe getting minimal benefit, it's possible that adding a medication, an antidepressant to that routine would be helpful. Makes it easier to do the work that we need to do. And these are all ways that we can create a sense of peace within ourselves and minimize those worries, those anxieties, those distractions that keep our brain cluttered. Following me so far? All right. Any questions?
I think I told everybody to save the questions for the end and put them in the chat box and I'll read them to you. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do we promote focus in our everyday lives? Focus, or the elimination of distraction, requires organization, planning, and an understanding of how we work best. Everybody's different. And as we age, things change. I used to study with the stereo blaring. I can't do that anymore. I have a middle-aged brain. So, when I had a teenage brain, that was fine, but it's not fine anymore. And as I've grown up and changed, I've had to evolve the way I work. So first off, I want to talk about organization. Organization is using reminders efficiently, having one go-to place for notes and reminders. Often people will say to me, well, I use reminders all the time. I have 100 sticky notes on my refrigerator. And my question is, well, when you need a particular sticky note, is that easy to find? Do you know where to look? Well, no. Or I have 4 date books that I use. Well, how do you know if every date book has the same information in it? I can guarantee you that it doesn't. So I often tell people to have one place where they have all of their appointments and another place where they keep notes and other types of reminders. If you can combine the place where you have your appointments and your reminders together and make it one spot, terrific. But there should be no more than 2 separate places to look. One for dates and appointments and the other for notes and reminders. And you need to develop a routine of reminding yourself for appointments, dates, chores. Check your calendar every morning. Check your calendar the night before so you can see what's coming up during the day. Get into that routine. Get into a routine of writing things down in one central location so you know where to look when you need that information. I love this phrase, organization is having a place for everything and everything in its place. Declutter and clean your environment. We will talk later on about the neurological and physiological impact of clutter. Clutter results in an overstimulating environment. It also just makes it hard to find anything. So having a place for everything and everything in its place lightens your mental load because you get into a routine. I know where my keys and my wallet are at all times. They're in the drawer in the kitchen, the same drawer every single time. So I don't have to think about it. There are very few locations where I lay my phone down. There's like 3 spots in my house. If I happen to lay my phone or remote control anywhere else, I can guarantee you that I'm going to spend at least 2 minutes looking for them and possibly cursing in both English and Italian. So organization and decluttering our environment is key in decluttering our brains. Planning requires you to learn how you work best and create a routine that supports you working at your best. Experiment with different workflow methods, times of day, etc. Some people work well in a quiet office with dim lighting. Some people prefer to sit outside and listen to water or listen to the birds chirping. That's fine. That's a nice kind of noise for most people. I should call it ambient sound as opposed to noise. Noise has a negative connotation. So some people prefer bright light, some people prefer dim light, some people prefer fluorescence. I don't know many people that do, but there are some. Other people prefer natural light. Some people work best in the morning. Some people work best in the evening. I know of a couple people that do their best work after 8 o'clock at night. And that's okay, but we need to know that about ourselves. and structure our work or projects to our unique needs. Also, we need to understand how we think. And this goes back to meditation, right? It's about delegating our mental energy towards goals and objectives, not towards perceived obstacles to those goals. You know, there's this book that was popular several years ago. I don't know if it's still popular, but it's called The Secret. And it was an easy read. I'm not by any means saying that it was a scientific uh, a scientific endeavor, but it does have a key central point that's useful. If we constantly focus on bad things, we often do bring those bad things into our lives. We create these self-fulfilling prophecies all the time. Think about how we do that in our own work. So let's say I had anxiety about giving this PowerPoint, and I sit down to do this PowerPoint, to do the research involved in it. And I go, oh my God, everybody's going to hate this PowerPoint. I'm never going to be able to do this right. This is just going to suck. It's going to be lousy. And that's what I'm spending my mental energy on. If that's what I'm focused on, I'm going to be way too distracted. I'm going to have a lack of focus. I'm not going to have enough focus to create a clear and understandable presentation for people. It's not going to be good because all of my energy is going towards that worry and that anxiety. In addition, the actual act of being, of worrying and the actual state of anxiety pulls blood away from my brain. It actually decreases my brain function on a physiological level. So I have less mental energy because physiologically there are all these chemical changes occurring because of my anxiety. And in addition, what mental energy I do have is being focused on how awful and terrible this is going to be. So we need to understand how we think and how our worries intrude on our thinking so that we can create a new pattern of thinking. We can shift away from that worry and focus on the goal, focus on the problem. And that takes effort and energy, and our minds are often like a wandering puppy, and we have to occasionally or very often yank on that leash and bring our brains back to center. But the more we do it, the easier it is to do the next time. So be a problem solver, not a problem dweller. Recognize that negativity is the ultimate distraction. Retrain your brain. Our brains often go to the negative because those pathways in our brain are used so much. So the more we use a pathway, the easier it is to activate that pathway later on. I often tell the story about, the morning I got my doctorate, that afternoon, somebody in the hospital, I worked at the VA hospital at the time, started calling out Dr. Domingo in the middle of the hallway. Well, I didn't answer because I didn't have a pathway for Dr. Domingo. I wasn't trained to respond to that. So I just kept walking until they yelled, Angelo. And then I turned around. Now, because that Dr. Domingo pathway has been activated so much, when I hear that, it's instinctual. I turn around, I pay attention. It's the same thing with chronic thought patterns. The more we practice a positive goal-focused thought pattern, the easier it is to continue that thought pattern later on. So I want to talk about flow. Flow is critical in unleashing our creativity and in achieving our goals. It's important to understand how we can lose track lose ourselves in a task or a project. And that's a good thing. You know, I know how I work. And for me, the hardest part of starting a new project or a new task or creating a new presentation is the very beginning. And I know that once I start getting into it and it starts coming together, I'm eventually going to reach a state of flow where my mind is entirely focused on what I'm doing. You know, and then I notice if I start getting a headache or I start getting, you know, cranky, I know it's time for me to take a break because I understand how I work best. So the ways to promote flow include what we discussed before, you know, reaching a state of peace, eliminating distractions to help us focus, but also creating a state of flow involves doing things that we love or doing things that interest us, that feel important on some level. You know, so take exercise, for example. A lot of people don't like exercise. However, they recognize the importance of it. The exercise is critical to my mental health. It's critical to my cognitive health. You know, it helps me think. And it's critical to my physical health for me to stay in shape. You know, with Parkinson's disease, exercise is all the more important. So recognizing that importance and reminding ourselves about that importance, and also reminding ourselves that we're going to feel better afterward. Even if we don't want to necessarily do it right now, we know we're going to love having done it when it's done. So recognizing that helps us to stay focused, be at peace, and create this state of flow. Give yourself a reasonable challenge without setting yourself up for failure. Don't take on too much. You know, often when I see my clients who are dealing with Parkinson's disease, their benchmark is who they used to be 10 years ago. So their goals, the challenges they set up for themselves may have been doable 10 years ago, but are not so doable now, especially in the time frame with which they want to get them done. So this goes back once again to understanding our own process, how we work, and creating reasonable goals for ourselves. If you have a main objective, break those goals down into manageable bits and give yourself a realistic time frame. If you feel pressure or anxiety, especially if you feel panic, that is not peace. That is not going to promote focus. That is not going to promote a state of flow. What that feeling is telling you is that maybe you need to dial back your goal to something that's more manageable. So for example, if I'm, know on a particular day that I need to exercise and I really don't want to, I tell myself, you know what, I'm just going to go take a walk around the block and I'll see how I feel after that. Because I know once I get moving that I'll want to do more. But that's what seems reasonable to me in that moment. You know, when I sat down to do this presentation, I figured I'd knock this whole thing out the same day. Then I started, like I said before, to get a headache, and then I got cranky, and I was like, you know what? Clearly that was not a reasonable goal. So I broke this up to do it over 2 days. And I didn't beat myself up about it. You know, I didn't get overly negative about it. I understood that that was my body telling me that I needed to stop. And that's okay. Beating myself up about it or judging myself because I didn't live up to a goal that was unrealistic just puts me in a negative mindset and leads back to that mental clutter. Once again, we need to learn how we work best, and this requires practice and experimentation. And we talked a bit about this already. Peak times of day, common internal and external distractions to avoid. If I'm really hungry, I don't work well. That's a common internal distraction. If I'm sitting too long and my lower back starts to ache, that's an internal distraction. And I have to take care of those issues in order to be productive. Best work environment, temperature, setting, lighting, ambient sound, etc. Experiment with it. If you are in a state of comfort where you're not being distracted by anything internally or externally, that is going to promote a state of flow. And lastly, but certainly not least, enjoy the fruits of your labor. Learn to take pleasure in the outcome of your work. Give yourself a pat on the back. No one, I shouldn't say no one, but very few people take the time to really appreciate what they've created and the effort that took. Often, especially if people are struggling with depression, their go-to, that pathway that's so easily activated is one in which they minimize their success. The bad stuff gets amplified and all the good stuff gets minimized. So please take the time to appreciate the fruits of your labor. So I want to talk now about the physiological and emotional impact of decluttering, both physically and, both in our physical environments and in our internal environments. So our physical environments have a profound impact on our physiological and emotional well-being. And there's several mechanisms that link our physical surroundings to our mood and our function. And these mechanisms include cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone. When we get anxious or worked up or frustrated, worried, our body releases cortisol. Understand that our bodies don't get modern stress. Our modern day life, modern day society is nothing like the environment we evolved in. We evolved on the savannah in Africa. So what our body knows is fight or flight. It doesn't understand work pressures from a lousy boss. It doesn't understand sitting in traffic, doesn't understand being late for an appointment. So when we get frustrated, stressed, anxious, worried, our body prepares for fight or flight because that's all it knows. And part of that process is cortisol. Chronic exposure to cortisol, the stress hormone, can lead to lots of negative physical and cognitive changes. And clutter, an environment that is full of distraction and overstimulation, an environment that's hard to navigate, all promote, all those types of environments promote elevated cortisol levels. Avoidance and procrastination often lead to a cluttered environment. I did read an article saying that procrastination was a good thing, Procrastination is usually not a good thing for people with Parkinson's, because in my experience, people with Parkinson's have a tendency to procrastinate a lot. You know, because of the neurotransmitter changes that occur in the brain, people with Parkinson's can sometimes have difficulty getting motivated, initiating action, initiating behavior. So I often hear from my caregivers, my spouse will just sit on the couch and watch TV all day if I don't get them up, if I don't tell them what to do. So we really want to minimize procrastination and avoidance. We want to take those first steps to get off the couch, get off our rear ends, and do something. And a part of that is staying on top of our tasks and our work to avoid having a cluttered environment or a to-do list that's pages long. It only makes the anxiety worse. So in several of the people that I see that struggle with anxiety, they will say part of their self-care routine is staying on top of things, staying on top of their work. And this way it frees their mind up. It no longer serves as an internal distraction. Clutter also leads to dissatisfaction with life. People often will look around at their environment or look at their to-do list, see all of these things that are outstanding, and start really getting down on themselves, getting down about the world, getting down about their lives. It promotes a sense of helplessness. It promotes guilt and shame. So by eliminating clutter, by staying on top of the things that we need to do, it has a direct emotional impact and improves our satisfaction with our own lives. So we've talked already about mental clutter, that refers to negative emotions, sadness, anger, guilt, fear, shame, and chronic negative rumination that we often see in anxiety and mood disorders. If you are struggling with a diagnosed anxiety or mood disorder, it is important to get adequate treatment to remove that mental clutter, because those chronic conditions, those chronic changes in neurotransmitter levels, those chronic changes in hormone levels, specifically cortisol, will impact your ability to function cognitively, emotionally, physically. That's all mental clutter. And it needs to be addressed. Don't minimize it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Because when we have these conditions, and then we beat ourselves up about having these conditions, it piles on another layer of mental clutter, of emotional clutter. It's the same as if, I have a cold and I get angry at myself every time I sneeze. Yet I refuse to do anything about it. When we have colds, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to have empathy for ourselves. It's the same thing if we struggle with anxiety or depression. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to have empathy for that condition. It is very, very real. But if we start to judge ourselves negatively, if we start to get bogged down by guilt or shame, especially guilt or shame, then we never get around to helping ourselves, and that clutter just builds. I want to talk about decluttering our physical space. So Decluttering our physical space can break the negative cycle of elevated cortisol, depression, and anxiety by creating an environment that provides a sense of control and mastery. I get frustrated when I misplace my phone or the remote because I no longer have a sense of control or mastery and I'm wandering around like a fool. But if I have a place for everything and everything in its place, that provides me with a sense of control and mastery over my domain. If I wake up and I come out into my living room and everything is a mess, I don't have a sense of control or mastery over that. What I'm feeling is overstimulated and overwhelmed. Cortisol levels go up, my cognitive function drops, my physical function drops, emotionally, I'm not in a good space, and all of that from just a mess. So we need to create an environment that we can feel proud of, an environment that promotes a sense of well-being and calm, an ordered environment. So reducing overstimulation also reduces confusion, frustration, anxiety, and depression. Decluttering our minds also breaks this negative cycle by creating a sense of control over our thoughts and feelings, as opposed to being controlled by our thoughts and feelings. Once again, I'm going to go back to meditation. Meditation, therapy, medication, all provide us the assistance that we need to observe our thoughts, to observe those patterns and change them. Exercise, adequate diet, adequate sleep, re-energize us and provide a sense of well-being. Chemically, frankly, it provides a sense of well-being and allows us to, it makes it easier for us to take those negative thought patterns and put them to the side. It allows us to control the pattern of thinking as opposed to being overwhelmed by that pattern of thinking. There's nothing like a good hit of endorphins. You know, runners will often talk about it as a runner's high. I have this bad habit of running too quickly, you know, because I got places to go, I got things to do, I'm a New Yorker, right? So, you know, if I manage to go at a reasonable pace from the start of my run, I can often hit that point where I get that endorphin kick and get a runner's high. A lot of the time I just go too quickly and tire myself out before that happens. But endorphins are amazing. Decluttering our minds allows us to devote and direct our mental energies, our focus to positive endeavors or tasks. Once again, controlling those negative thought patterns allows us to change them and devote our mental energy to our goal, what we want to achieve, to solving a problem as opposed to dwelling on a problem. Dwelling is mental clutter. And I provided a link for all of you. It's a Deepak Chopra meditation. The last talk I gave was a meditation on gratitude. This one is a slightly longer meditation. It's about 12 minutes. And it's a meditation on peace and creating inner peace, and touches on a lot of aspects that we discussed today. And I provided a list of references for you folks that wanted to check out some of the references that I used in creating this PowerPoint. And so are there any questions?
Yes, and I'm going to put the, this will go up on our website, parksandplace.org, under presentations. So any of the information you would be able to find also there. So we have time for one question. And one question is, how hard is it to retrain our brains? And does this become a daily ritual of our life?
Yes, it's hard. It is hard, but it gets easier. The more we do it, the easier it gets, like anything else. Retraining our brains is like exercising a muscle. We are creating new positive pathways when we retrain our brains. And at first, it's so difficult because our brain is working hard to create those new positive habits and thought patterns. But once those patterns are created, it gets so much easier. And the more we activate those positive thought patterns, the easier it is to activate them later on. So, for example, we can use driving as an example. When we're first learning to drive, we have to think about everything, don't we? And everything requires all of this concentration, and we have to, we have to engage all these parts of our brains to figure out what we're doing. And as we drive more and more, it becomes thoughtless, right? How many times have you driven to the supermarket and can't really recall the actual drive, right?
Gary?
It's the same process with negative thought patterns. That's why meditation and therapy are so key, because the first step to retraining our brain is understanding and being aware of the pitfalls that we typically fall into. Being able to objectively see those thought patterns to change them. So in therapy, I may say something like, wow, it seems like you go into a lot of relationships with the expectation that someone is going to hurt you. Do you notice that you have that expectation? And it seems like you then push people away because you're afraid that they're going to hurt you. Oh, I never really thought about it like that. And when you can see something like that maybe you were too close to in the beginning to notice, when you can see it for what it is, that empowers you to make different choices and change. And those changes are hard. They feel wrong. They feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but the more we do it, the more natural it becomes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it did. So thank you. This was such a great, I can't wait to get started myself, and I'm sure everybody else. It goes with our spring into spring into challenge. And well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And, we don't really get to talk about this other aspect because we always are dwelling on our physical part, but it's great to be doing this, and we truly appreciate it. And thank you for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was my pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.